Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. We're going to begin today by hearing evidence from a witness who was directly involved in the programme to replace the front doors of flats in Grenfell Tower. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Morning, sir. May I call Abigail Acosta?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Acosta.
Morning.
Good morning. I gather you're going to make the affirmation.
I am, yes.
Yes, well, it's on the screen in front of you. Would you read it out, please? Thank
I
you.
will do. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good. Thank you very much. Would you like to sit down?
Yes, please. Thank you.
And make yourself comfortable. There's water there if you'd like some.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, good. Yes, Mr. Kinnear, when you're ready.
Thanks, sir. Would you please confirm your name for the record?
Abigail Acosta.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Acosta. Thank you very much for attending today. Before we start your evidence, three things I should say to you. First of all, if any stage you need a break during the course of evidence, please don't hesitate to say so. That's not a problem. Secondly, would you please keep your voice up whilst giving evidence? That's to enable the shorthand writer to capture everything you say and to capture it accurately. Please don't nod in answer to a question. Please say yes or no as the case may be. And finally, my questions are intended to be short and comprehensible. If they're long and incomprehensible, please say so and I'll try and correct the position. Is that okay?
It is. Thank you.
Now, you've made one statement for the inquiry, which is dated the 19th of December 2019, which can be found at TMO 00862539. Is that your statement?
It is, yes.
And have you read it recently?
Yes.
And its contents are true?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, the first thing I'd like to discuss with you today is your background, your position you held at the TMO, and your qualifications generally. When did you start working for the TMO?
I started working for the TMO in 2009.
And what was your job when you first started?
I was a contract administrator.
Now, is it right that you were a project manager for the capital programmes team from September 2009 onwards?
Yes.
Can you remember now who appointed you?
Valerie Sharples.
And what particular qualifications did you have for the job of project manager?
At the time, Association Project Management Accreditation, which was prior to Prince 2.
Can you help us? What's Prince 2?
Prince 2, it's an accreditation in project management, i.e. the stages of project management and how a project manager works with a project team in projects.
And in September 2009, what was your experience of project managing?
Previously, I had worked with Notting Hill Housing Group for 10 years, and I worked my way up from administrator to project manager. So in new build and refurbishment, so I had various projects and experience with regards to project managing and contract managing a programme.
Thank you. In your witness statement, we don't need to go to it, at paragraph 2, which is at TMO 00862539/1, you say that you had no specific training in fire safety.
No.
Did you have any general training in fire safety?
No.
Did you have any general training in health and safety?
Yes.
And what training were you provided by the TMO?
Just refreshers, so as part of our induction.
And had you had any fire safety training before you joined the TMO?
No.
Can I take it from that you were unfamiliar with the requirements of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order of 2005?
Yes.
And equally, you'd be unfamiliar with fire safety guidance published by the government, such as the Sleeping Guide and the LGA Guide?
Yes.
Before you started work on the flat door replacement programme, did you think you required any additional training in the regulatory requirements that governed flat entrance doors?
Yes, and I did make that clear to my line manager at the time that I was not technically qualified to manage it from a technical aspect, only from an administrative aspect.
Who was your line manager at the time?
Valerie Sharples, and Simon was the interim head of service.
That's Simon Throp, is that
Yes,
right? So that's
correct.
THROP.
Correct.
And you made it clear to both of them that you had no technical expertise in relation to doors. Is that a
Correct.
fair summary?
Correct.
Did you ask for any training in relation to the regulatory requirements that governed flat entrance doors?
Well, I was told that I was only managing the contract, i.e. the programme and payments, etc. I wasn't managing the technical side of it. I was only there to support our health and safety team. So therefore, I wouldn't have asked for specific training because it wasn't my duty. It wasn't the role.
We'll come on to this later, but can you
Okay.
help us at this stage? Who was meant to be governing or supervising the technical aspects of the
It
door?
was Simon, then moving forward, Mike Halliman, who was then took over Valerie and our health and safety team.
Thank you. We'll come on to that in due
No
course.
problem.
Before we go any further, Mr. Costa, it's incredibly tempting to answer the question before it's completed. It's probably better if you let me complete the question, then give your answer. That's just to avoid the shorthand writer having to make good the transcript. Now, when you were managing the flat entrance door refurbishment programme, were you managing any other contracts at the time?
Yes.
What were you managing at the time and how many?
From what I recall, Little Chelsea House, which was internal decorations and roof works. We had cyclical decorations as well. There was a lift programme as well.
Can you help us now, and of course it varies over time, but what percentage of your time was devoted to the flat entrance door programme? Can you remember now?
I'd say probably 30 to 40%.
Now, we've touched on this in recent answers, but could we come on to the management structure that you were subject to? As you've indicated there, Simon, is it Throp or Thorpe?
Throp.
Throp was Assistant Director of Investment and Engineering, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And what was his role in relation to the flat entrance doors replacement programme?
Well, he was the technical side in the sense that he had done a previous contract before he came to the TMO. So he had the information, the specifications, etc., and he had the authority to sign everything off.
Now, in early 2011, Mark Anderson became the part-time interim and later the Director of Assets, Investment and Engineering.
That is
Is that
correct.
right? And he left in January 2013, is that right?
I'm not sure because I left beforehand. I left in February 2012 due to illness, but I got made redundant in April 2012.
While you were still there, was he the director with responsibility for the flat programme?
He
flat
was.
entrance door programme. Thank you. And as you've indicated before, Valerie Sharples was your immediate line manager in relation to the flat entrance door programme. Is that right?
Correct, and then changed to Mike Halliman.
What was the specific role that Valerie Sharples performed in relation to the flat entrance door programme?
Which initially the contract was to be managed by her, but due to health issues, it got handed over to myself because Valerie couldn't attend site as much as other team members.
Looking at how responsibility was divided between yourself and Valerie Sharples, who was responsible for the early contact with the London Housing Consortium? Was that you or was it Valerie Sharples?
Myself.
Who was responsible for establishing which doors were to be included in the programme?
That would have been Simon, Valerie and myself.
Who was responsible for devising the contract specification for the doors?
Simon and health and safety team.
And as you've indicated previously, you saw yourself as responsible for the administrative side of the contract, whereas Simon and others were responsible for the technical aspects. Is that right?
That is correct.
Can you help us? What was Janice Ray's involvement in the programme?
Well, she was leading on health and safety, so she worked very closely with the London Fire Brigade, and from the information collated with the meetings with the London Fire Brigade and fire risk assessments, she would then provide us with the addresses and to create a programme for the actual contract.
Now, you indicated in an earlier answer that Valerie Sharples was later succeeded by Mike Hallamond,
Correct.
and that happened in July 2011. Is that about right?
That's about correct.
And thereafter, you reported directly to Mike Hallamond. Is that right?
Correct.
And what was his level of involvement in the programme?
Well, Mike had quite an extensive technical experience, so he had previous experience on fire doors and other high technical programs, and he was my direct line manager, so everything went through Mike.
He also seems to have handled complaints from residents. Is that right?
Yes, if they escalated, usually complaints were managed by Resident Liaison Officer Lorna Cunningham, but if it escalated to stage 2 or 3, then Mike would also get involved.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, can we turn to the flat door replacement programme itself? First of all, what prompted the programme?
There was a need of funding and pressure from the London Fire Brigade and I think central government for works to be done under decent homes. So there was a great push for local authorities to do the programme, and I know London Fire Brigade also was pushing for these programmes to be done.
Who ultimately made the decision to proceed with the programme?
I don't know.
In Janice Ray's witness statement, and we don't need to go to it, but the reference is paragraph 6, which can be found at TMO 00847305/2. She says this, and I quote, "The fire door replacement project was overseen by the TMO's asset investment and engineering team. The project manager was Abigail Acosta. While the health and safety team did not oversee the project, I was involved to the extent that I acted as a liaison between the project team and Carl Stokes, the TMO's fire risk assessor." Is that a fair summary of Janice Ray's involvement in the programme?
Well, I think she was a bit more involved. So she was devising the programmes and providing us the information of priorities, so which buildings had to be done before and which ones didn't. So she had more involvement than that, I think.
So she ordered the priority of the fitment programme, is that right?
Yes, in theory. So the priorities would come through the fire risk assessments, whatever had been identified, and discussions collaboratively with the London Fire Brigade, and then Janice's team would devise a programme of addresses pending on the priorities highlighted or recommended under those fire risk assessments.
Would Janice Ray attend monthly progress meetings in relation to the programme?
Yes, and if those meetings that she didn't attend, she was always CC'd into all the minutes.
If outside those meetings, did you ever have cause to discuss, for example, the regulatory requirements which govern doors with Janice Ray?
I don't recall those discussions, but we would have had discussions, yes.
Can you help us? What was Carl Stokes' role in the flat door replacement programme?
He was helping Janice's team with the fire risk assessment programme, but also took a kind of big role on the technical side to assist us to inspect also on the quality and workmanship of Man's Master doors.
Right, we will come on to the advice that Mr Stokes gave in due course. But can we now look at the doors that were included in the flat door replacement programme? Do you recall a stock condition survey being carried out by Rand Associates?
I do recall it. I wasn't there at the time, but yes.
Now, if we turn up the document, you may jog your memory when you see it. TMO 00866665, which may have to be downloaded. There it is. Now, we can see here a summary of the condition of relevant doors in various properties. Looking at this now, does it ring any bells with you?
No.
Now, if we can look at column K, you'll see on the top of the page, there we go, thank you, and you see immediately above the capital letter K, you'll see a reference plug 30 mins plus. Is that a reference to the timber fire door certification scheme?
I don't know.
Did Rand Associates provide you with any analysis of the information they collated, or was their role simply to collate the information?
Yes.
The latter? They would
To
just
collate the information to put on our systems to enable us to then programme works under decent homes.
Were the doors listed in this survey, and particularly I'm thinking of those that were missing fire safety elements, were they presumed by the TMO not to have met the relevant regulatory standards?
That's correct.
Now, if we can go to an email that you sent to Graham Sidaway on the 21st of August 2010, that can be found at TMO 0086 662 /2. If we go to the bottom of the page, if possible. Sorry, go to the top of the page, sorry, it was my fault. There we see your email, 21st of October, to Graham Sidaway. Can you help us, first of all, who was Graham Sidaway?
He used to work to collate the programmes, so the RAND information went to him. So Keystones kind of team. Sorry, I can't remember the name exactly of the team.
Here we go, an email from you nonetheless. And you say, Graham, hi, we're due to have a meeting with LHC, that's the London Housing Consortium, with regard to procuring a programme with them relating to fire doors under the Fire Risk Assessment Programme. Valerie has asked me to speak to you to see if you could check the attached list, in particular the ones highlighted in red with our new stock condition data. When Janice Ray prioritised the buildings to be fitted with the doors, to what extent was cost a consideration when determining which buildings, which doors should be fitted first?
I don't think it went by cost, it went by priority. So if it was priority 1, that means it was at high risk, so we would deal with those properties first. If they were under priority 2, meant they were at high risk but not as high risk. And we only, under this contract, concentrated on priorities 1 and 2.
And so the RAND stock condition survey identified those that presented the highest risk, and that directed the order of fitment.
I think it was the other way around. So they were highlighted through the fire risk assessments and conversations that Janice had with the London Fire Brigade. We would then get those lists, and then it was passed on to Graham's team to make sure, one, that they were on the system, and if anything else was highlighted, that could have been a high priority before undertaking the works.
Thank you. Now, if we go on to page 1, and we see Mr. Sidaway's answer, and if we look at the 5th paragraph down, which starts with the words, the list you attached. And it says this, the list you attach goes some way to identifying the priority blocks, but there is more to do, as clearly there are thousands of doors that don't meet the FR. Now, first of all, what did he mean, or what did you take him to mean by the FR?
Fire risk assessment.
Fire risk assessment?
Yeah.
Had he used the word fire resistance rather than fire risk?
Yes.
And that's what you understood him to mean, fire resistance?
Yes.
Was the intention to replace all the doors that had been identified by RAND and or the FRAs as non-compliant?
Yes.
Now, can I turn to a separate topic, which is the door specification itself? As project manager, did you have any responsibility for devising the specification?
No.
That lie entirely with Simon Throp, did it?
Yes.
Did you have any involvement in the preparation of the specification?
Yes, I collated all the information together, all the tender documents together, and passed them on to Valerie at the time, and Simon and other internal stakeholders, before they were obviously procured.
So, please shout if this is unfair. Was your role administrative and essentially secretarial, collating the information, rather
Yes.
than having any involvement in the substance and the technical substance?
That's correct.
Thank you. Would it be fair to say that you had no relevant experience or indeed expertise or training in compiling the specification for the door programme?
No.
Do you remember whether Mr. Throp or indeed anyone else sought specialist advice on the substance of the specification for the programme?
I'm not aware.
Can you help now assist the panel the degree the extent of the involvement of the health and safety team in the preparation of the specification?
Well, they worked closely with Simon and under their senior management team meetings. So I'm hoping that those discussions took place.
But you can't speak directly
I cannot, because I never formed part of those discussions or meetings.
Thank you. Now, if we can go to your witness statement, which is at TMO 00862539/3, and paragraph 4, Roman I, which is near the top, sorry, little I should say, at the top of the page. Now, you list details there of what information was sought as part of the procurement process. You say specification of doors, design advice and support on the interpretation and conformity to regulatory requirements, including planning assistance, full survey and installation service, including programming, residents' choice exercises and ongoing liaison, installation works and management undertaken to the guidance set out in BS 8213-4 and BS 8214, including finishing and making good 10-year product and installation guarantee. Who provided the information on the specification of doors?
Simon provided one that he'd initially done previously, and also the LHC under their call-off agreement.
Can you speak directly as to whether Janice Ray or Carl Stokes were involved?
They were involved, so they saw the specifications before they went to board, so yes.
Can you remember whether anyone gave design advice?
Not that I recall.
From whom did the TMO seek or obtain or receive guidance in relation to interpretation and conformity with regulatory requirements?
I don't know.
Can we go to TMO 00866673? Now, as you see from the top, these are minutes of a meeting of fire risk assessment works, the fire door programme, held on the 4th of November 2010. We can see that you attended, as did Janice Ray and Valerie Sharples. Can you help us? Who was John Parsons?
John Parsons, he collated the information for Keystone, and he was the one that put the data in the Keystone systems. So he informed was our data analyst.
Thank you. Now, if we can look at the second paragraph under the heading discussion, it says this: specification required and preliminary clauses pending on form of contract we decide to take. Specification to be taken from LHC, so that's the London Housing Consortium website. Now we are full members of LHC. Can you help us? What was meant by the phrase specification to be taken from LHC website?
So under the call-off agreement, LHC had a specification for the fire door programmes. So I collated that information and then compared it with what Simon had provided and just ensured that everything was factored in that was required.
But when you say you collated that information, is it, put bluntly, you simply downloaded the
Yes.
bespoke
That's correct.
specification that was on the LHC website?
That's correct.
Now, reading on, the third paragraph says this: tender list needs to be put together via LHC. This will be discussed further when we meet LHC on the 10th of November. Who was responsible for preparing the tender list?
Well, the tender list would have been LHC because they would have had the suppliers under that lot, under the call-off agreement.
Can you remember now whether you had a meeting with the LHC on the 10th of November?
I can't recall that.
Can you remember ever discussing with the LHC the scope of the flat door replacement programme?
Yes.
And was it you seeking advice from them?
Yes.
And were you the primary contact with the LHC?
Yes.
And can you remember now what particular issues you sought their advice in relation to?
Just the technical advice.
Standards and what you needed to
Standards, requirements, approved document B, like what was the minimum doors to meet the standards.
Can you remember seeking their advice in relation to the substance of the specification?
Some, yes.
Can you remember on what topics now?
On the doors in particular.
But can you remember any precise issues in relation to the doors?
No?
No.
No.
Sorry.
That's all right.
when the door specification was drafted, was Carl Stokes' confirmation sought as to whether the specification was compatible with the relevant regulatory standards?
Yes, he was kept in the loop all the time.
Were you responsible for asking that confirmation of him, or was that dealt with by other people?
I'm not sure what you quite mean
Well,
by
did
that.
you ask him, or did
No, I asked him, of course. If I wasn't sure about a technical matter, I would go to my team who were there to support for technical purposes.
Now, in your witness statement, and we can go to it at TMO 00862539/4. Now, in response to the question, was the contract for the supply and installation of FD30 or FD30S doors, you say at paragraph 6, and midway down the page, this: FD30 composite doors, door set fitted, had relevant smoke seals which should prevent any smoke getting through vulnerable areas of the door. Now, was it your understanding that the doors were required to be FD30 with cold smoke seals?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you understand that to be the same as an FD30S door?
No.
No. Did you ask Carl Stokes, for example, what the difference was between FD30 on the one hand and FD30S on the other?
We did, yes.
Did you understand self-closing devices to be an essential feature of the door set?
Yes.
Did you make it clear to the LSC or the LHC that this, or what the specification was that the TMO required?
Yes.
Looking back now, do you remember what the distinction you understood to be between FD30 on the one hand and FD30S on the other?
So FD30 composite doors have the seals inside. If it's FD30S, the sign would be outside the door.
Do you remember now whether the LHC knew that the doors were for protected corridors and so had to be FD30S? Do you remember now?
I don't recall that.
Were you aware, following on from the answer you've just given, that for the purposes of approved document B, the suffix S, so after FD30, indicated that a door had been tested for cold smoke leakage?
Yes.
Yes. And you got that information from Carl Stokes, did you?
Yes.
Now, can we turn to MAS *0035/3, which is a bundle of tender documents? And we see at the very top of the page, clause 1.1, and it reads thus: security, 30 min fire door, supply and fit in accordance with TMO performance specification, 1 number GRP 30M, fire security door set, complete with, and then it goes on to list various items of door furniture. As far as I can see, that specification does not mention or refer to smoke seals. Is that right?
Correct.
Are you able to help us as to why smoke seals were not mentioned in this specification?
I can't.
Did you pick up the absence of any reference to smoke seals with Simon Throp or Janice Ray or Carl Stokes or anyone else at the time?
Everything would have been passed on to Mike and Simon and Valerie, as well as Mark.
So you'd have deferred to them?
Yes. And also health and safety team, all internal stakeholders would have been informed.
Now, if we can stay in this document, but go to page 90, that's 90, and there's a more detailed specification there. And if we go to page 90, actually before we move on to page 93, again, this more detailed aspect of the specification, that would be the doing of others rather than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And Simon
Yes,
Throp,
that's
presumably.
correct. Yes.
And Simon Throp, presumably.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, if we can go to page 93, and we can see at L, so roughly halfway down the page, it says there that the doors are required to meet BS 476 Part 22 requirements. Were you aware at the time that those were fire resistance requirements?
Yes.
And again, did you get that information from Carl Stokes or someone else?
Carl, Simon, and also through the LHC website.
Now, that section goes on to say that, and I quote, independent test reports must be provided at request. Were you aware of that particular provision?
No, not at the time.
When did you become aware of it?
Well, after leaving TMO, way after.
After the fire?
Yeah, well, I wasn't employed at the TMO when the fire, but yes, when I started with my new employer, we did a FRA accreditation, so obviously I learnt about the fire requirements and regulations far more.
Thank you. Now, you can take it from me there's no mention of smoke seals in this more detailed specification. Looking back now, would you accept that smoke seals ought to have been included within the specification?
Yes.
And can we take it that the health and safety team, including Carl Stokes, would have seen this more detailed specification?
Yes, they did. Well, they actually not only read it, but they confirmed that they had no issues with the quality of the manufacturing of doors and installation and works with MANTS.
Thank you. We'll come on to those later matters. Can we now turn to TMO 0086702? Apologies, may have to be downloaded. Thank you. Now, as you see, this is the second tab, and it's called the Shore Door Spec Sheet, and this is the completed door specification sheet for the flat front door replacement programme. This was sent to you on the 1st of March 2011. Again, for the avoidance of doubt, would you have forwarded, or did you forward that to the health and safety team and Carl Stokes?
Yes.
And you invited Mr. Stokes to consider it, presumably?
Yes.
Now, if we look at row 30, that's 30, on the far left-hand side, immediately next to it, the words letter plate, and then the next column to the right says sleeved fire rated. Did you understand from that that the letter plate was fire rated?
Yes, that's correct.
Was that an assumption you made, or was it a piece of information you sought confirmation from others in relation to?
Others, and also MANTS provided us with information, so additional information on their products.
Following up, did you ask for any fire certification or test results in relation to the letter plate?
No, we didn't.
Were you ever advised to seek such information?
No.
Did you ask whether the door furniture and hardware was fire rated?
Yes.
And was that a question you asked of your own volition, or was it a result of advice given to you by health and safety team or Carl Stokes or anyone else?
Just advice given, and also asking questions.
And advice from whom?
Simon, our clerk of works, Gary.
Now, if we can stay in this document, go further down the page to row 36, which concerns door closers, and we can see there that the specification is said to be, and I quote, RUK, surface mounted overhead as standard, barymatic, so that's BARYMATIC, concealed jam closer if overhead cannot be fitted, surveyor to confirm. Can you recall any discussions now about the specific choice of self-closing device?
We did have discussions when post the installations commenced, not prior.
So at this stage, there was no debate about competing alternative devices?
No.
This suggests that the default position was that an overhead closer, looking at that, that suggests that the default position was an overhead closer, and only when it couldn't be fitted, then a baromatic concealed closer would be used. Is that your understanding? Was that your understanding at the time?
Could you repeat that?
Of course.
Sorry.
Looking at what's set out there, it seems to be that the surface-mounted overhead device is the standard
Yes.
option. But if that, for some reason, didn't work, then the fallback position would be a baromatic concealed jam. Was that your understanding at the time?
That's correct. But a surveyor of Manse would go out before that was confirmed to us if it was required.
Can you remember now what a baromatic concealed closer was?
I can't.
Was there much debate about that as the fallback option at the time?
I don't recall.
Can you help now as to why the doors at Grenfell were fitted with an Astra self-closing device and not either of the two options set out here in the specification?
I can't recall the actual name of the device, but it was a self-closing device.
Now, can we go to TMO 100375503, which is the Shore Door GRP brochure? First of all, do you remember seeing this brochure?
Yes,
When were you first given it?
with LHC. It's on their website.
So it's
Part of the
before the
call-off
award.
agreement. Yes.
So it's before the award of the contract to
Yes.
Manse Master Door.
Yes.
Did you understand the doors supplied by Manse Master Door were as set out, or as per the details set out in this brochure?
Yes.
Did you look at this brochure to satisfy yourself that the door specification as set out here met the TMO's requirements as set out in the specification?
Yes, and with internal stakeholders as well.
Now, you can take it from me that this document refers to FD30, and there are no references to FD30S doors. Was that something you picked up at the time?
No, I can't recall.
Now, as project manager, was it your responsibility to ensure that the doors supplied by Manse Master Door met the door specification as prescribed by the TMO?
That would have been health and safety's responsibility.
So you had no role in that at all?
No, I wasn't a technical person. I was just a contract admin.
As part of the administrative role, would it have been part of your function to have collected the relevant certificates and documentation relevant to the doors to be provided under the contract?
That would have been covered by Bailey Garner, Health and Safety Advisor under CDM 2007 regs, and Manse Master Door.
Was that something they did automatically, or did they act on instructions from you to do so, to collect that information?
No, they would have had to do that as part of the regulations.
But would you have notified them as to when?
Yes, well, they would notify me to let me know when works were completed, and then we would get our in-house technical people to go and check everything off ahead of that.
Now, it seems that on the 14th of February 2011, you received from Manse Master Door the CHAS certificate, the FENSA certificate, that's FENSA, and the SBD certificate and insurance documentation.
Yes, as part of their tender documents.
You don't appear to have received the fire test certificate for the doors, is that right?
I don't recall.
Was that an omission which was picked up at the time? Presumably not.
No.
Who was responsible for checking that relevant documentation had been provided by Manse Master Door? Was that you, or was it Bailey Gardner? Or someone?
Myself and Valerie at the time, and Mike, but he was post.
So neither you nor Valerie Sharples nor Mike Hallamond
Picked
identified that the fire test certificates had not been provided?
No.
Would you agree that in the absence of such documents, the TMO could not be certain that the doors had been tested to the relevant fire resistance standards?
I can't say that.
Well, if you had no fire test
yes.
certificates,
Yes.
so you accept that
Yes.
So just make sure the point's clear, and I've put the full question to you. You accept that absent those fire test certificates, the TMO could not be certain that the doors had been tested to the relevant regulatory standards. Do you accept that?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, in his evidence, Carl Stokes indicated that it was your responsibility to look at the technical information in relation to doors. Do you accept that proposition?
No, I don't.
Assuming that it was your responsibility, did you have the technical expertise or knowledge to do so?
No, I didn't, and I made that very clear from the beginning.
When Mance Mustardor installed a replacement front door, did they provide any information to the resident of the relevant property? Do you know?
Yes, so Lorna, our resident liaison officer, worked very closely with Mance Mustardor resident liaison officer Natasha, and they built a resident's choice list that had all the different choices of the doors and ironmongeries, etc., colour choices, which were collated from the residents. Then this was given to our resident liaison officer Lorna, which was then fed back to Mance for them to pre-order the doors, etc.
Can you remember now whether residents were given information on the importance of self-closing devices?
I don't recall.
Thank you. Now, can we turn to the tender itself and the completed tender documents, which can be found at MAS quadruple 000035/4. Now we can see the tender documents there signed at the bottom, for and on behalf of Mance Mustardor, signed on the, I think the date's obvious there, the 13th of January 2011. Did you have any role in analysing or assessing the bids that were received?
No.
As far as we can make out, no product literature or information was provided with the tender documents. Was that something that had been, that omission, had that been identified at the time?
Because it was a call-off agreement, so the actual procurement tender process had been undertaken by LHC already. So this was just a further mini competition to ensure that the pricing and the quality of the product was still as it was when they first tendered via the LHC.
Thank you. Now, if we can go to TMO 00842274/1. And this is a report entitled Flat Fire Door Replacement Programme. It was sent to the Operations Committee for decision on the 22nd of February 2011. We can see from the box entitled Recommendations that acceptance of the lowest tender, which had been made by Mance Mustardor, was recommended. And if we turn over the page to page 2, you're identified as the author of that report. Is that right?
Yes.
Was this the summary that the project team produced following the mini competition evaluations?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you help us? Who was involved in the preparation of this report for the Operations Committee?
Myself, Valerie or Mike at the time, I can't recall who was line managing at the time, and the head of services, so either Simon Throp or Mark Anderson.
Was the London Housing Consortium involved in any way?
No, because this was an internal approval.
Was it your understanding when this recommendation was made that the doors supplied would meet the relevant regulatory standards?
Yes, I did.
And in due course, the Operations Committee approved the award to Mance?
Yes, they did.
Now, if we can now turn to the advice given by Mr. Stokes, and in particular a letter he sent on the 7th of March 2011. And if we go to CST 000013074, and this is a letter that Mr. Stokes sent to Janice Ray. What I'll do, I'll just let you briefly skim read it. Please shout when you need to be taken over to the second page.
I can go to second page, thank you. Thank you.
Now, there's reference there to various meetings between Carl Stokes, Janice Ray and Simon Throp. Is it right that you
I
didn't
wasn't
attend?
involved. No, I didn't.
Did you know about those meetings? Can you remember?
No, I didn't.
Do you remember having seen this letter before?
No.
This is the first time you've seen it?
Yes.
Can we go back to page 1 and point 1 in this letter? And you'll see there, below the third paragraph, there's numbered point 1, which says this: can it please be confirmed that the doors that are to be fitted under the contract are the FD30 minute fire doors, FD30 version, and could the company forward all relevant documentation to confirm this? And then if we can turn over the page to top of page 2 and numbered point 2, it says, can it please be confirmed that the doors will meet all the requirements of the current building regulations and of the HM Government Fire Safety Risk Assessment Guide for sleeping accommodation? This includes the hinges, letterboxes called letter plates, and any securing or locking mechanisms. Were you asked to confirm either or both of these points with Mance Mustardor?
No, but that information was provided to the health and safety team in various occasions.
Put differently, did you ask for confirmation from Mance Mustardor at any stage that the doors supplied under the contract were FD30?
Oh, yes.
At the time, do you know what Carl Stokes meant by, quotes, relevant documentation, close quotes, to confirm the status of doors as FD30?
I'm presuming it's the specification and certs to accredit that it's meeting the standards or BS guidance.
Did Mance Mustardor ever provide you with that information?
Yes. It's on the LHC website as well.
Were you aware that Carl Stokes had raised these points?
No.
Can we now turn to the pilot installation? And if we can go to CST 000-12163. And if we go to the top of page 2, this is the first email in the chain from Janice Ray to you on the 11th of March 2011. And she said this: Simon, presumably Simon Throp, met with our fire consultant Carl Stokes yesterday and discussed this work programme. And she goes on to say, Simon asked Carl to be present when the first door is installed so that he can confirm that he is happy with the door and also with the workmanship. Was that your understanding as to why Carl Stokes attended for the installation?
Yes, he was there to support Janice's team on the technical side as well as ourselves.
And was it your understanding at the time that Simon Throp wanted him there to confirm that he was happy that the doors met the specification?
Yes, that's correct.
And all relevant standards and regulations?
That's correct.
Was it standard practice at the TMO to have a pilot installation programme for similar capital works?
Yes.
And to use that as a means of securing confirmation that the specification had been met and the standard of installation was satisfactory?
Yes, and also to see what other issues could arise during installation or what the impact would be for residents as well. So it was just trying to minimise as much as we could and get the installation or the product of works correct.
Am I right in thinking that Alex Fomin, Fomin, from the London Housing Consortium, attended the pilot installation?
He also attended.
And was he the technical officer who was responsible for carrying site visits?
On the LHC behalf, yes.
And why was he attending?
Well, as part of the call-off agreement, they agreed, or as part of their service, that they would undertake 10% of inspections post-installation.
So they carry out a sample exercise?
Yes, yes.
And did you or indeed anyone else at the TMO regard him as having particular expertise in the standards relevant to flat front entrance?
Yes, yes.
Did you ask him about his experience or relevant qualifications?
No.
You just assumed he had the relevant expertise?
Yes.
Now, he produced a site visit report, which you can find at CST 0002758. If we go to that. Did you read that report?
Yes, we would read the report.
And the report, if we look at the very bottom right-hand corner, is that countersigned by Chris Powell?
It looks like Chris Powell. I can't say. Sorry.
Was he an employee of the TMO? What was his involvement?
I don't even recall who Chris Powell is, I'm afraid. Sorry.
You had no dealings with anyone?
No.
Was your expectation that Alex Fomin would raise any issues of non-compliance?
Yes.
And at the time of installation, you were relying upon their technical expertise?
Yes.
Now, if we could turn over the page and look at page 2, the second line, if we go to the very top of the page, you'll see the second line from the top says this: door supplied was of good quality and professionally installed. Did you rely upon that report as evidence that the LHC were satisfied that the doors installed by Mance Master Door met the relevant regulatory standards?
Yes.
Did you pick up on the point that there's no reference to fire safety or the particularly the fire-resistant qualities of the doors in this
No.
report?
Again, as I said, I wasn't a technical person, so it's not something I would pick up or look into thoroughly.
Did you also rely upon the reports from Alex Fomin to assure you that the relevant requirements, the building regulations, had been complied with as well?
Yes, not just Alex, but also the TMO Clerk of Works as well, Gary Killick.
Did you ask Alex Fomin what particular checks he was carrying out to assure himself, for example, that they'd met the requirements of the building regulations?
Yes.
You're sure on that?
Not 100%, no.
How sure are you?
60%, because we would have had discussions of what type of inspections we would have wanted carried out and the form of the reporting.
Were you relying upon anyone else to give you comfort that the building
Yes.
regulations had been satisfied?
Yes.
Who else were you relying on?
Carl and Gary Killick, and also at, say, the most extreme presence would be Bailey Garner as our CDM coordinator advisor at the time.
Now, if we can stay on this page and look at the footer at the very bottom of this page, it says this: the site visit report is for the purposes of checking compliance with the product specification for the above named LHC framework arrangement, inclusive of the delivery of site services. It is not intended to be a supervisory inspection report and should not be used as such. Now, bearing in mind the answers you've just given, bearing in mind of what this says at the bottom of the page, did you read that footer at the time, so May 2011?
I don't recall reading the footer, no.
Is it fair to say that you did not understand at the time the report to be limited to essentially compliance with product specifications?
That's fair to say, yes.
Now, can we next go to CST *0003139/1? So it's another email correspondence, and we can see at the bottom of page 1 an email from Mr. Stokes on the 17th of May 2011. And he said this: do you want me to comment on this report because I believe that it is not acceptable? The report being the one we just looked at. Were you surprised by the contents of that email? Do you remember?
I don't recall, sorry.
You don't remember the email at all?
No, I remember, no.
So do you remember this email?
No, it's 9 years ago. No, I don't.
Do you recall a letter from Carl Stokes explaining why he believed the report was not acceptable?
I don't remember. He may have sent it through, but I don't remember exactly what was sent because there was lots of literature sent between us during the duration of the programme.
Now, if we go to CST *0001654, now this is a letter 23rd of May 2011, so some 12 days, or slightly less than that, a few days after the report we've just been discussing. It's addressed to Janice Ray. Do you remember receiving this letter?
I may have been copied in, but I don't recall. No.
Now, the first part of the letter is about the door itself, and on the first page he states in the second sentence of the first paragraph this: from the information given to me by the installation team on site and the technical sheets before had from yourselves, the door fitted was a fire-rated version FD30 of the shore door GRP range. Did you, or indeed Janice Ray, to the best of your knowledge, take this as Stokes' formal confirmation that the door was compliant?
From reading it, yes.
Did Carl Stokes ever give to you the information he'd been provided by the installation team?
No, that I recall of.
Now, if we can go to just the bottom of this page, we see there's a run of numbered points, and he sets out his comments on the report. I'm not going to go through these, but if we could just look at them and turn over the page to page 2. If you didn't receive this letter, do you remember the substance of these concerns being communicated to you by anyone else at the time?
Janice would have emailed, if there was major concerns, that information would have come across to our team through the relevant stakeholders. So if there was a major concern, Janice would come to us, we would raise it with Mance, Carl would form part of it, LHC as well, and also the TMO's Clerk of Works.
Was Janice Ray always very good about forwarding matters that raised concerns to you and others involved in the flat door replacement programme?
As far as I recall, yes.
You never felt out of the loop?
I did, but yeah.
But in relation to concerns that had been raised regarding...
Yes, so if she raised a concern, then I would obviously seek the technical advice. So if it was something administrative that I knew, it would be fed back to her. If it was something that I wasn't aware of, then we would ensure to seek the correct information to give back to her.
Thank you. Can we go to CST *0001607? And this is an email from Mr. Mark Anderson sent on the 13th of June 2011. And we can see Mr. Anderson's email, thank you, amplified there. And he says in the fourth paragraph of this email this: I'm slightly apprehensive about us recommending an FD30S door set, as this may not meet the full requirements of the building regulations, despite the stance taken by LFIPA and building control. He went on to suggest, and I quote, a review of the applicable building regulations in the next paragraph. Now, as a result of that email, you then emailed Carl Stokes on the 15th of June, and if we can de-amplify the screen, asking him, can you confirm what Mance are meeting the below approach? And that's set out at the stop. Now, was that the first time you'd asked Carl Stokes to check if the door specification was acceptable?
Oh, he would have been involved from the tender stages as well, or Janice's team would have been involved.
So, as a result of that, it was because of Mark Anderson raising concerns.
Yes, that we would have.
If you wait for me do wait for me to finish the question. Because of Mr. Anderson's request, you then thought it was prudent to raise it directly with Mr. Stokes. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, could we go to CST *0001388? Now, this letter is from Carl Stokes, this time addressed to you, and dated the 24th of June 2011, so roughly a month after the first Alex Foman site inspection report. Could I ask you just to briefly skim read it so you can remember its contents? Would you mind turning over?
Sorry, second page. Thank you.
Now, that appears to be his response to your email request the 15th of June 2011. Is that a fair assumption to make?
Yes.
Now, if we can go back to page 1 and roughly halfway down that page, I'm sorry, the type's quite dense, but it's the line that starts, the specifications of a fire door. Have you got that?
Yes.
He says the specifications of a fire door and the standard required in a particular location is specified by Part B of the building regulations in Appendix B, open brackets, fire doors, close brackets, and the performance of fire doors is judged by subjecting them to the standard test procedure specified in BS 476, Part 22, 1987, or BS EN 1634-1, 2000. He goes on to say, also incorporated in the door could be fire-rated glazed panels. In the new fire doors would be cold smoke seals and intumescent seals or strips. Do you think you should have had that door specification in writing before awarding the contract? That level of detail?
Yes.
Before that letter was received, did Mr. Stokes, to the best of your recollection, ever mention the need for a door to meet testing under BS 476, Part 31?
He did in several of our correspondence, but that literature was also in Mance's specifications as well, stating that it met those requirements.
Now, just turning back to page 2, and really the concluding paragraph, he says there, from all the technical information provided by the manufacturers and the inspection sheets provided by LHC, the new flat entrance doors supplied and fitted by Master Door meet the requirements of the building regulations in that the doors are FD30S. This includes all the door furniture fitted to or on the doors. Any glazing fitted in the doors is fire rated according to the information provided, as is any glazing fitted surrounding the doors. Did that provide you with the reassurance you were seeking in your email of the 5th of June?
Yes.
Did you know what technical information Mr. Stokes was referring to there in the concluding paragraph of this letter?
Well, he was referring to the standard building regulations, so the guidance of building regulations, and I'm assuming also RRO and FRAs.
You're assuming because you don't know.
I don't know, no.
Do you know whether Mr. Stokes had asked Master Door directly for any information, or do you always used you as the channel for communications with Master Door?
I don't know if he directly contacted Mance. I'm assuming he did because they worked closely, i.e. when they were on site, so I wouldn't see why they wouldn't have those discussions.
Now, looking at this paragraph, the concluding one, he refers there to FD30S. We previously looked at his letter of the 7th of March 2011, where he simply referred to FD30 alone. At the time, did you pick up that difference between what is set out here and in his letter of 3 months earlier?
I probably would have, but I would have assumed the S is plural, so...
And thought nothing of it?
No.
You say you probably did. Can you remember whether you did?
I can't say that.
Now, looking back, whose responsibility was it at the TMO for ensuring that the doors were essentially fit for purpose?
Carl, health and safety team, and our clerk of works. And the last remit would be Bailey Garner, ahead of compiling our health and safety files before practical completion.
Now, can I turn to a separate topic, which is leaseholder properties. Now, did all the blocks included in the replacement programme have doors that did not comply with fire safety regulations?
Yes.
And so it was important in all those blocks for leaseholder residents to replace their front doors?
Yes.
Was that generally understood to be the case within the TMO at the time?
Yes.
Did you understand that a failure of an individual door to meet fire safety requirements put not just the relevant flat at risk, but potentially the fire safety of the block as a whole?
Yes, but then it negates to what the leaseholder's agreement or leasehold agreement states. So a leasehold agreement states that the leaseholder is responsible for the door frame and the door. So therefore, yes, say the TMO as the landlord is responsible for the building, but if then the leaseholder is responsible to ensure that they're installing a, correct door, then it's very hard to gauge where that liability stands.
Well, can we turn to a minute of a programme progress meeting on the 9th of June 2011, which can be found at TMO 1 00881. And there we go, you attended. And if we can turn to page 4 and paragraph 5.9. And it says there, it was agreed by all parties if leaseholders wish to have same doors via master door, they will have to arrange a private arrangement directly with master door, NB, to keep note if this does happen for our records. Had that particular arrangement been asked for by leaseholders themselves?
So leaseholders expressed interest. I worked very closely with Dan, who was the home ownership manager at the time, with regards to the liability of where the lease information stood versus the programme. And I know Dan sought legal advice at the time, and Dan agreed that any resident or any leaseholder that wished to have the doors done could do so at the same price as we were paying at the time of the programme. And then once Mance installed the doors, we would ensure that it met the same standard, i.e. inspections, as normal residents would have.
Dan, what was Dan's surname? Can you
I
remember?
think, if I recall correctly, Daniel Wood. He was the home ownership manager at the time.
Now, could we turn to TMO 00867251? And if we could turn over the page to page 2, we can see just in the bottom half of the page you'd received an email from Keith Mott, who, on behalf of the Grenfell Leaseholders Association in respect of flat doors, we don't need to go through the email, but Mr. Mott was making the point that if tenant doors at Grenfell required upgrading to meet current standards, leaseholder doors also needed to be upgraded. Now, did that reflect, it seems if it does, did that reflect the TMO's understanding at the time?
Yes.
Did you therefore accept Mr. Mott's point as valid?
Yes.
No response, so far as we can see, was sent to Mr. Mott's email. Can you help us as to why not?
Every email that was received through residents would come through our customer service team, or say if it was a complaint through our complaints team. Mr. Mott being a leaseholder, it would have gone to Daniel's team, and then Daniel would ask us for the information. We would provide that information, and it would then be responded via the actual service. So leasehold team would respond back to Keith Mott, not ourselves directly.
Thank you. Now, if we can go to page 1 of this email chain, and it's your email to Mark Anderson, which is at the bottom of page 1, and you say, middle of the 3rd paragraph, Dan has confirmed if they wish to do a private arrangement, so I should say 2nd paragraph, if you wish to do a private arrangement with Master Door Direct, they are happy for them to do so, keeps KCTMO out of equation. Again, the Dan there is Dan Wood.
Yes, that's correct.
Why was Dan Wood keen to keep, quotes, KCTMO out of the equation, close quotes?
I think because of the legalities of it, because it is under the leasehold agreement, it's the leaseholder's responsibility. So I'm assuming that's what he meant by it.
Thank you. If we turn to the top of this particular page to see Mr. Anderson's reply, which was also sent on the 13th of June, and he states there in the opening paragraph, I find it difficult to accept that we would treat leaseholders in a block differently to tenants, especially where fire safety is concerned. Now, did you agree with 100%. That?
100%.
Now, if we can go to further emails, and if we can go to CST 0001607, now this is basically further email correspondence following from Mr. Mott's correspondence, and this correspondence takes place slightly later, but on the same day. And if we can go to the middle of page 1, and we see a further email there from Mr. Anderson, and it's looking at the 3rd paragraph of that, he says this: as a responsible landlord, we should, however, alert leaseholders to this and highlight the legislative requirements. And then he goes on to say, in the 5th paragraph, I think it is, I suggest a review of the applicable building regulations, and if the approach currently being adopted is acceptable to the organisation, then we could offer to assist leaseholders by facilitating a private arrangement for the installation of equivalent door sets with the contractor due to undertake works to the tenanted properties within blocks. Any such arrangement would be a private one between the leaseholder and the manufacturer installer. What was your impression at the time that he was referring to all leaseholders in blocks where Mance Master Door were replacing the doors?
Yes.
What did you make at the time of Mr. Anderson's suggestion?
Well, I just kind of did what I was told, so I wouldn't have gone against my head of service.
Do you know whether Mr. Anderson or yourself referred this to Janice Ray?
Janice would have been informed.
And would she have been responsible for taking actions as directed by Mr. Anderson, or who would be?
I think Janice's team as well as the leasehold team.
Now, if we can go to the minutes of the fire flat door replacement programme on the 10th of August 2011, so just 2 months after this correspondence, that can be found at TMO 1 /911/5. And if we go to paragraph 5.3, we see there that the minutes record this: Master Door to send list of leaseholders that have made private arrangements for installation of doors for our records and home ownership. And so can we take it from that by August 2011, Mance Master Door were installing doors for leaseholders under a private arrangement with Mance Master Door?
Yes.
Now, if we can go to a letter drafted by Mance Master Door to leaseholders, and it's dated September 2011, which can be found at TMO 00868127. And if we look at the second paragraph of that letter, it says this, and I quote, Mance Master Door have given an undertaking to Kensington and Chelsea TMO that we will offer to supply and install new high-security front entrance doors rated to 30-minute fire resistance and to the same specifications approved by Kensington and Chelsea TMO to all leasehold. The cost of these doors are in line with the current contract rate. Do you recall seeing that letter in draft or in final form?
No, because that's something that our resident liaison officer would work closely with Mance's resident liaison officer, but Dan would have seen this letter and would have approved it before going out to leaseholders.
So it wouldn't necessarily have crossed your desk?
No.
Do you know whether Dan Wood or indeed anyone else kept records of which leaseholders had had their doors replaced under arrangements?
I would have sent that information to our leasehold team.
Now, just finally under this topic, can we turn to TMO 00868146? And this appears to be an email chain about the letter we just looked at. At the top of the page is an email from David Ward to you on the 7th of September 2011. First of all, who was David Ward?
He shared ownership officer.
Thank you. And we can see that he says, I stress again that these are only to be sent to those that have expressed an interest and shouldn't be sent to all leaseholders. Now, that restricted offer seems to be contrary to what Mr. Anderson had in mind. Is that a fair reading of what Mr. Ward is suggesting?
That's a fair reading, yes.
Can you help us as to why a more restricted approach had been taken?
I don't know why.
Who would it have been? Dan Wood who had been responsible for
Yes, as the head of service, yes.
Thank you. So I've reached the end of the present topic. Bearing in mind the time, that's probably an appropriate point subject to yours.
Well, Ms. Acosta, we have a break during each session, and this seems to be a good time to have the break for this morning. So we'll stop there. We'll resume at past. Well, how long are you getting on this morning?
Just over the halfway point. So if we could come back at past, that would be.
Yes. We'll come back at 11:30, and I have to ask you please not to talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Thank you.
All right? Would you like to go with the usher then, please?
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, would you ask Mr. Acosta to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Costa, you
Yes.
ready to carry on?
Yes, thank
Good.
you.
Thank
you very much. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Costa, can we turn to the topic of the Clerk of Works? Now, first of all, is it right that Gary Killick was assigned to the programme?
Yes, he was a TMO agency staff member.
Now, do you remember that Mr. Killick left in or about March 2011?
He left and then he came back.
And when did he come back?
I don't recall exactly when he came back.
When he came back, did he come back to a role as or discharging some of the responsibilities of the Clerk of Works?
Yes, he came back as the same role, yes.
Did he come back, presumably, while she was still employed at the TMO?
Yes,
So before February 2012?
yes.
Now, the reason I ask is that it certainly seems on the documents that Alex Fomin was performing the responsibilities of Clerk of Works for a period of time. Was that right?
Yes,
And during Gary Killick's absence, that's what he was doing, was it?
yes.
Now, could I take you to an email chain which can be found at TMO 00866728 /2. Now, here you see it's an email from Valerie Sharples, 1st of March 2011, informing everyone that Gary Killick is leaving. And that there's a short-term handover. If we can go to your reply at the top of this page. And it's the first sentence of the email, which deals with fire door programme. You say, myself and Alex, that's Alex Fomin from London Housing Consortium, could cover the Clerk of Works role. Am I right in Alex being Alex Fomin?
Yes.
Why did you decide that a full-time Clerk of Works replacement wasn't required and that you and Mr. Fomin could do the job?
Because the standard process was a 10% on-site inspection, post-inspection, and everything else was done auto-text. And some of the programmes of other projects hadn't commenced. So we had the capacity at the time.
You've repeatedly said during your evidence that you lacked technical
Yes,
knowledge in relation
yes.
to doors. In relation to offering up yourself, what experience or expertise did you have that would allow you to discharge?
I didn't, but if...
So why did you put yourself forward then?
I don't know. Not sure.
Had you thought before you sent this email as what the division responsibility would be between yourself and
No,
Mr. Fomin?
we're just trying to help.
Can you remember whether Valerie Sharples responded to your offer of help?
I don't recall.
Did you end up performing any element of the Clerk of
No.
Works role? And is it fair to summarise matters that Alex Fomin stepped into the breach?
Yes.
Could we look at TMO 00866968 /2? Now, looking at the top of the page, it's an email you sent to Alex Fomin. The start of it is on the bottom of page 1, but we don't need to go to that. You say there in the second line, could you let me know when we are ready to sign off some doors after setting the standard? And if we go back onto the bottom of page 1, we see Alex Fomin's response, which is, Abby, do you want LHC to sign them off, or do you want me to indicate which ones are ready for handover? I'll pop on site after lunch today and can discuss plan of action with Andy. Now, what did you mean when you used the phrase, when we are ready to sign off?
So when doors were ready to be handed over to us?
And did you expect Alex Fomin to sign off on every door that had been fitted?
No.
What were you expecting him to look at? Was it a sample?
Yes, a 10% sample.
Now, we have the last email in this chain, which is at the top of page 1. where you say, Alex, hi, please indicate which ones are ready, as I would like to be there for sign-off. Can you help us? What was the process of signing off of these doors?
So when Mance was ready, ahead of handing over the doors, Alex would go on site and ensure that the doors were installed correctly. He would then inform us of that. We would then, either myself or the clerk of works of the TMO or Carl at times, would go on site to ensure that everything was ready for handover and completed as per the spec, and then we would issue the practical completion.
Why did you want to be there?
Just to make sure that the properties that they said were completed had been completed for payment purposes.
Were you present for all handovers?
No.
Were you just present for the initial ones? Or,
Yes.
And then did you stop attending thereafter?
Yes.
Can we go to TMO 00867158? And if we go to the, I think it's the top of the page, you say in the second line, or rather, yes, you do. It's an email to Natasha Brown at Masterdoor, copying in Alex Fomin. You say this, Alex, please ensure that prior to work's been signed off that residents can use door. Now, again, is it right you're using Alex Fomin here in the Clerk of Works role?
Yes.
Checking that the doors are working satisfactorily?
Yes.
Did you have any specific discussions with Alex Fomin about him undertaking Clerk of the Works job?
No. Not that I recall.
And so basically you handled matters via email correspondence?
Yes, and phone calls.
If you just, sorry.
Sorry.
I understand the temptation to answer the question. But actually you deal via phone and via email asking him to do tasks that seem to be, at least, the traditional remit of the Clerk of Works. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, can I turn to the question of site visit reports? And these reports seem to have been forwarded to Carl Stokes as a matter of routine. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes.
Were you expecting Carl Stokes to pick up on any problems and bring them to your attention?
Yes.
Did you, before forwarding these reports, did you consider them yourself, or did you just automatically forward them to Carl Stokes?
Myself and also Mike at the time, as well as the health and safety team, Carl.
And what were you expecting to come back from Mr. Stokes?
Well, if there was any issues with the installation when he was also undertaking his inspections post Alex's, for him to address them so we could address them on site ahead of practical completion. We wouldn't sign off a door with practical completion if there wasn't adhering to what they should be doing.
Can we go to LHC *000008/2? Now, this appears to be a standard site visit report, is that right?
Yes.
And they consisted of summary descriptions of the problems that were identified, is that right?
Yes.
And if we can look, see roughly halfway down the page, at comments in relation to King Charles House. And if we look at the third comment in relation to door 13, it says the door was inspected externally and appeared to be professionally installed. However, fixings and operation of door closer were not checked. Were most of the inspections external only?
Yes.
And why was that?
I don't know. That's just standard practice that TMO had.
And the corollary would be, or the consequence would be, that Mr. Fomin was unable to check the fire safety features of the door, such as a self-closing device, strips and seals, and the rest of it.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. If residents were in at the time, then we would knock on residents' doors to ensure that was done.
Did the fact that the majority of the inspections were external and did not include an inspection of the self-closing device, strips and seals, did that cause you any degree of concern at the time, given the importance of those features for ensuring fire safety protection was as assured as it could be?
No, because Mance didn't give us concerns as such of their workmanship.
So nothing was flagged up to you?
No.
Can we de-amplify this page? And you'll see at the top there are various items in relation to Grenfell itself. And you'll see the first item there is the door in respect of flat 162. And it says this: door frame was out of plumb and it was not possible to lock the door. RLO and fitters have been advised, and it was confirmed that a rectification was arranged. Were you aware of similar issues?
Yes, those are not day-to-day issues that arise during a contract, but they do. And whilst on site, they are dealt with on site.
And flowing from that answer, what arrangements were in place to rectify these deficiencies?
So if there was a deficiency, we would liaise with MANS, we would instruct them to rectify it. They would come back to us with a verification as to when it was done, and then Lorna, our resident liaison officer, would either go to site or contact the resident to ensure that they were happy with.
Now, the Lorna, is that
remedy.
Lorna Pemberton?
No, Lorna Cunningham.
And Lorna Cunningham's role was she was effectively verifying that the rectification works had been satisfactorily completed.
With the residents, 'cause she was the resident liaison officer.
Now, can we go to CST *01620? And we see here at the bottom of page 1, Alex Foman emailed you on the 14th of June 2011. And he said that he'd inspected 45 doors, and that was 28% of the required number to be inspected. Was that the first time you were made aware that he was only expecting a sample or a proportion of properties? Or were you aware that's what the plan was beforehand?
Yes, that was the plan. But usually it's a 10%.
And did you expressly agree that it would be 10%, or was that an unspoken assumption?
It's just an unspoken assumption.
Now, in total, it appears that he inspected some 137 doors, including the trial door, out of a programme of 1,197 doors. Did you think at the time that was an acceptable proportion to be inspected?
I can't say. But
Well, at the time, were you satisfied that inspecting 137 out of nearly 1,200 was acceptable for your purposes?
yes, at the time, yes.
Now, if we can go to TMO 00867384 on the bottom of that page, it's another email chain. You emailed Alex Foman on the 27th of June, asking him, could you ensure, at the very bottom of the page, could you ensure that the report is reflective of actual works being undertaken for audit purposes? What did you mean by audit purposes here?
For my projects, I always created an audit file with key information and certificates, so if we needed to refer back to it or any other internal stakeholders, the information was there and accessible.
And what was key information for these purposes?
Certificates, anything that arose during works that, i.e. repairs, that were important, so like the device closers, etc.
Given that Alex Foman was only looking at a limited sample, was your view that those reports were nonetheless sufficient for your self-created audit purposes?
Yes.
Now, if we can go to stay on this page, and it's the top of page 1, and Alex Foman said this: it was never intended to inspect all properties in the contract. I've inspected only those properties which had doors installed or being installed on that day. Obviously, this one was installed at the later time. Now, would it be fair to say that was the first... It looks at first blush that was the first time that Alex Foman said he would not be looking at every door installed?
Yes.
When you became aware that Alex Foman was not looking at every door, did you reconsider at all whether a clerk of works was needed to ensure that the balance were being satisfactorily installed?
Yes, this was raised at one-to-ones with my line manager.
And so you're saying that in or about June 2011, you raised these matters with Valerie Sharp or with Mike Element?
Yes.
Because he came, I think, in July 2011.
Yeah. Okay, well, Valerie then at the time, yes. I always made clear that I didn't have the technical.
Can you help us then? What steps you proactively took to ensure that the doors that had not been examined by Mr. Fomin were inspected to ensure that they'd been satisfactorily installed?
Well, that's where Carl came in.
You say that's when Carl came in. Can you help us as to what you're
As
expecting
we
to do?
would have expected health and safety with Carl's support to be also doing a further 10%, maybe not the same ones that Alex did, and recheck what Alex did as well.
So let's look at each element of that. When you refer to health and safety, are you simply referring to Janice Ray?
Well, and her team, not just Janice.
Or how many people are in her team?
From what I recall, Carl was there, a gentleman called Adrian, I'm not sure who else.
And you were expecting Carl Stokes to carry out his own sampling exercise and an inspection of the works that Fomin had inspected. Is that right?
Yes.
Was that expectation confirmed in any email correspondence, or was it again something that had been arranged verbally, or was an unspoken assumption?
Verbally.
And with whom had you agreed that?
I'd spoken to my line manager, and he said he would raise it with the head at the time,
So when you say he, so
Mike.
that expectation was, your expectation was made clear to Mr. Hallamond, therefore, with the reference to he, so it would be after July 2011. Did he confirm to you that he discussed the matter with Janice Ray?
No.
You just assumed that
Yes.
he had made good what you asked of him?
Yes.
Can we go to a witness statement from Mr. Fomin, LHC, quadruple zero 9/2. And it's paragraph 6A Roman 4. He says that he had no authority to sign off any installations, only advisory role. Site visit reports were issued to both supplier and member for information. In relation to his role in the programme, were you aware that that was the limits of his remit and responsibility?
Yes.
And in particular, that he had no authority to sign off installations?
I wasn't aware of that. I
You
don't
weren't
recall
aware of
that.
that?
I don't recall that.
Would you agree that the reports he provided were only for information?
Yes.
Which tends to suggest that he didn't have authority to sign off installations. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Can we now look at the sign-off process? Is it right to say that there were weekly on-site meetings whilst you were project manager?
Monthly.
Monthly.
Weekly ones were undertaken by the clerk of works role and Carl.
And what was the purpose of your monthly meetings?
It was just to ensure that works were how they were progressing on programme, payments and valuations, and also resident matters, i.e. complaints, etc., or if any riddles were reported as well. So any incidents on site, accidents, i.e. with operatives. As part
By
of
RIDOR, you're referring to RIDDOR,
OR, yes.
and the responsibility to report certain accidents involving injuries to
Whilst
the
on
relevant
site.
authorities.
That's correct.
Now, you say, you attended these meetings, presumably?
Yes.
And were minutes ever taken?
Yes.
And you were responsible for preparing those minutes, were you?
Yes.
Now, in your witness statement at paragraph 8, we don't need to go to it, but the reference is TMO 00862539. You say this, that works on site were approved and signed off by Clerk of Works and Health and Safety Coordinator Bailey Gardner. Once they signed off on site with Mance Mustardor, I would do formal sign-off with them and issue practical completion for that phase of works. Now, was it your expectation that every door installed under the programme would be independently inspected?
Sorry, when you say independently, do you mean by a third party?
Yes.
No.
And you were solely reliant upon Fomin and Stokes?
Yes.
Were Bailey Gardner ever formally instructed by you, or to the best of your knowledge, anyone else at the TMO, to inspect any doors?
Not formally, but under CDM coordinator, they would do again a sample inspection to ensure things were done correctly ahead of them compiling our health and safety files.
Put differently, did anyone other than Alex Fomin provide you with reports on the quality of installation?
No.
Now, Andrew Webster, in his statement, and that can be found at MET 000655153/4, says this. We don't need to go to it, but at the conclusion of the door replacement project, site visits were conducted in the presence of Abigail Acosta and Alex Fomin. The doors were signed off by the KCTMO surveyor, and this was at first Abigail Acosta and towards the end various other people as stand-ins. What do you think, had you put yourself forward as being a KCTMO surveyor?
No, I wasn't a surveyor. I'm not qualified to be a surveyor.
Can you help us how frequently you carried out site inspections when Mr. Webster was present?
At the beginning, probably about twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. But as the programme progressed and things were going on well, I only attended site at handovers or if there was a real concern of a matter.
Just following on from that answer, what particular event would trigger handover and practical completion?
Handover was when doors were inspected. Practical completion would follow that. So a few days later or a week, etc. Once we had all the relevant paperwork, then we could issue the practical completion to MADS.
And were you alone responsible for issuing practical completion
Yes.
certificates? Was practical completion supposed to be done on a block-by-block basis?
Yes,
So each block would be signed off when all the flats had had their doors replaced?
that's correct.
Now, if we can go to TMO 00869011. Now, will you confirm for us this is a practical completion form?
Yes,
And was it your signature that was required under the client box
yes,
at the bottom of the page? The absence of signature from either the LHC technical officer or you tends to suggest that neither was present for the handover of doors at Grenfell. Is that a fair reading of this certificate?
that is a fair reading, yes.
So when would you sign these certificates and on basis of what information?
At our monthly site meetings.
Would you simply sign a bundle of them as you went
Yes.
through? Would you ask, as you signed, say, for example, flat 11, would you ask whether there are any issues arising? On what basis would you sign it?
Yes, so we would ask if we would look at past minutes as well if there was issues to ensure that matters had been closed and addressed, as well as with the support of the resident liaison officer. And at time post meetings, we would then maybe do a walk around the blocks just to make sure, and doing a visual on each floor to make sure that everything was okay before handover itself.
Were the certificates ever signed by the LHC's technical officer?
Not that I recall, no.
So it'd be solely your sign-off?
Yes, it would.
Would Alex Fomin be present at these monthly meetings?
Sometimes, yes.
But not always?
Not always, no.
Do you recall any training being offered or provided by Mance Masterdoor during the course of the programme to the TMO's caretakers, ESAs?
Yes, and also the day-to-day repair operatives. So once that handover, the doors had a 10-year warranty, which Mance would go back and rectify. But obviously it was imminent that the operatives were also trained to enable them to undertake the correct repairs, because if not, then it could obviously affect the kind of integrity of the door if there was fitted properly or repaired properly as such.
Can I now turn to a separate topic, which is the strength of the self-closing devices? If any issue had been identified with a self-closing device during this process, was that problem reported to Janice Ray and or the health and safety team?
They were indeed.
And what were the arrangements for making those reports?
Sorry. In relation, so when something was identified,
If there was a problem with,
Yeah.
I'm thinking particularly about self-closing devices, when that problem was identified, would Janice Ray and or her health and safety team be immediately notified?
yes.
What were the arrangements for making those notifications?
Either via email or a call, or we would have a quick internal meeting and discuss the matter on how we would obviously move things forward.
And would they be kept updated about any issues cropping up with the installation
Yes.
of doors?
Everything, they were CC'd into all the minutes, so even if they didn't attend monthly site progress meetings, that would also be included as part of the monthly progress meetings if it was identified within that month. Or
Now, one of the issues that cropped up was the strength of the self-closing devices. And I think I'm right in saying that one issue emerged that the devices were too strong for frail residents to allow them to open the door easily. Is that an accurate recollection?
yes.
Now, if we can go to the second site visit report, which can be found at LHC *00019. Now, this concerned meetings, or rather site visits on the 17th, 18th and 19th of May 2011. And we can see that 4 door closers were listed as needing to be adjusted on page 2. And those doors were 102, 103, 191 and 196. Now, did it give you cause for concern that a number of the newly installed doors were not classified as OK or professionally installed?
No,
Why was that?
because how could I explain it? Just because the adjustments were hard or stiff, it doesn't mean that they installed them incorrectly. Generally, I found with the programme, and it still has with other employers, that vulnerable residents and elderly residents do tend to find the doors quite heavy because they are heavy doors. So it wasn't a concern that the door was not integrate as such. It was just having to work round to minimise, say, elderly residents having difficulties in closing their doors.
So what did you ask Mance Master Door to do as a workaround, to use your phrase,
So-
to ease the doors to allow frail residents to open them?
So we addressed the issue with them at the time. Lorna, also our resident liaison officer, was quite highly involved in this side because obviously she worked closer with residents. Mance went back and had a look, and they came back with different specifications and different resolutions, which was then passed on to Mike Hallimond, who was my line manager again at the time, which had more technical expertise, and they approved to change the closest to an automatic one only to those residents that had severe issues and vulnerable issues with opening and closing their doors.
And what steps did you take to ensure that ESAs and caretakers were aware of what needed to be done to adjust or to deal with the issue, short of replacement of the self-closing device?
Well, I know Mance spoke to caretakers and some training was taken, but I did not form part of that.
Do you remember whether Janice Ray was involved in discussions about how best to adjust the problems with self-closing devices?
Yes, she was.
For frail residents?
Yes, because she also addressed some concerns to us as well, because information at times not just came through our customer service team, it would have come sometimes directly through our complaints and sometimes through Janice's team or other internal stakeholders.
Now, following on from those answers, can we turn to advice you received from Carl Stokes in a letter on the 4th of August 2011, and that can be found at TMO 0086 7927. And if we go to page 3 of this letter, and the first paragraph of the section under the heading Conclusion. And it says this: I would advise that self-closing devices, where fitted to a flat entrance door located in a protected staircase or a protected corridor, should not be removed. This existing situation is being made worse, a building regulations term, and by removing the self-closing device, and you could be placing one or more relevant persons at risk of death or serious injury in the case of a fire. And then, case of a fire. And then if we look at the next paragraph, he proposes a solution in the following terms: there are alternative solutions to removing the self-closing device from the flat entrance door. If you'd like me to attend a meeting with the providers of the doors or with yourselves, please instruct me. Do you know whether Mr. Stokes met Master Door or yourself to discuss his alternative solutions?
No, I don't recall.
Do you recall any meeting with Carl Stokes about this issue?
I do recall having email exchanges, but not a meeting. I don't recall having a meeting.
Were any alternative solutions identified and agreed upon?
Yes.
And did you agree them with Mr. Stokes?
I didn't agree them. Mike Halliman agreed them, and then I fed that information back to internal stakeholders.
So it was the correspondence between Stokes and Halliman rather than yourself and
Yes.
Stokes? And you were told the result of it and then communicated that to relevant people?
Yes. And to Mance, obviously.
Is it fair to say that after reading this letter, you were completely clear that self-closing devices were not to be removed?
Yes.
Was that message communicated to caretakers and ESAs?
Yes, and sheltered accommodation schemes via Lorna, our resident liaison officer, because she was on site more. And we did identify some properties that had taken them out, and we had to go back and install them back in.
So did you expressly instruct Lorna Cunningham to make sure that the caretakers, ESAs, understood the position?
Yeah. Not instruct, but she was copied into the emails.
So are you assuming, therefore, that she took those steps, or can you speak directly to the panel and say...
No, I'm assuming.
What conversations did you have, or to the best of your knowledge, Mr. Halliman had with Master Door about the suitability of alternative self-closing devices?
Well, I emailed him all the relevant additional information that Mance had sent us with pricing. Mike took that away, and from what I recall, he came back to me to say that he was satisfied with the new proposed device that Mance was proposing and to go ahead with it because it was an additional funding to it as well. So we had to seek authority for it or approval.
And would Lorna Cunningham have been responsible for checking with frail residents that any remedial works had been satisfactorily completed to allow them to open their door properly?
That's correct, yes.
And you won't be able to assist the panel on that?
No.
Can I now turn to the new topic of a failure of the self-closer fixings and mechanical faults? And if we could go to an email which can be found at MAS:0187/82. Now, this is an email from Master Door's Andy Webster to others at Master Door, you're not included, and indicates there that there was a manufacturing issue with the self-closing devices. Did Mr. Webster, or indeed anyone at Master Door, communicate that problem to you?
No.
Could we turn to TMO 00867783/3? And we see at the bottom of that page an email. It's the first one in the chain, dated the 21st of July 2011. Carl Stokes emailed you stating this: on Tuesday I was at Lancaster West and was informed that the self-closing device on 3 of the new flat entrance doors have come away from the door. This is the same problem as in King Charles House. Are you aware of this recurring fault? And if we can go to the top of this page, i.e. page 3, we see your response on the 25th of July. Carl Stokes indicates this problem is occurring because the screws holding the closer into the doors are very short, at least at King Charles House. There we go. First of all, were you concerned by that news?
Yes.
And what did you do to remedy it?
I then emailed Mance straight away to ask as to why it was happening.
And what response did you get from them?
From what I recall, I think Andy had said that the fixing screws were smaller, so he ordered bigger, wider fixings, but it wasn't the normal kind of manufacturing. There wasn't a normal issue, but that they were using the bigger screw fixings for precautionary measures.
Now, if we could go back to page 2 in this chain, and particularly the top of page 2, we have an email from Andy Webster on the 26th of July. Is this the response that you were referring to in your earlier answer?
Yes, yes,
Did Mance Master Door tell you which properties were affected by this problem?
yes.
Was it many?
I don't recall how many, sorry.
What arrangements did you put in place to ensure that the affected doors had been repaired?
Well, once Mance Master Door would have confirmed that they would have been done, then Carl or somebody from the health and safety team would have been notified, so they would have hopefully gone on site to make sure it was done.
Am I right in understanding, please shout if I'm not, that Mance Master Door did not replace screws on all doors?
No.
They simply changed the screws on the affected doors?
That's correct.
As far as you were aware, did that resolve the problem?
As far as I was aware, yes.
After this email correspondence with Andy Webster, did you have any further discussions with him or anyone else at Mance Master Door about this particular issue?
We would have had an internal discussion, maybe verbally. I would have raised it with Mike in my one-to-ones, definitely, to say that this has occurred, but that we found a remedial to it.
Did you check with Mance Master Door that all doors at Grenfell had been checked and fixings changed where necessary?
If fixes were required, then yes, we would have.
How did you keep track of, how did you first of all know the extent of the problem, and how did you keep track of the remedial measures designed to deal with it?
Well, the remedial measures, obviously they would give us a list and say a date of when the remedial works took place, and I would then work with our resident liaison officer, because Lorna would be the one ensuring that she would contact the resident to ensure that Mance had met that appointment.
Now, if we can now turn to minutes of a progress meeting on the 1st of November 2011, that can be found at MAS *0 0325/4, on particular paragraph 6.2. And we see there AW, presumably Andy Webster, confirmed that hinges are being replaced and manufacturers are looking into fault and supplying replacement that will be fit for purpose. Is it fair to say that you raised this issue with hinges at that time with Andy Webster, or
Yes.
did Webster spontaneously report it to you?
No, we definitely reported it to them. They had the list of all, especially via Natasha, who was their resident liaison officer, so she worked quite closely with Lorna, so any issues raised by residents, they would have been aware of straight away.
Now, did the issue with hinges relate to all of the self-closing devices that had been fitted?
No.
Can you give the panel your recollection of the extent of the issue with hinges? How many properties?
I think, like it's shown, King Charles House had a few sheltered accommodation ones as well, but I can't really say the percentage of it, I'm afraid.
Now, you say that it was recorded there at 6.3 that the client, that's you, would like London Housing Consortium to check a few once replaced to ensure suitable. Was that done?
I would have instructed Alex that next time he's on site to have a look, so they would have been informed, yes.
You say would have, did you?
I can't remember.
Now, were you aware of circumstances in which residents or the handyman at Grenfell, such as Seamus Dunley, were proactively removing and not replacing or repairing self-closing devices?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Were you aware that self-closing devices were being removed by residents and indeed Seamus Dunley, one of the repairmen at Grenfell?
No.
Thank you. So I've come to the end of my prepared questions. Might I
Yes.
ask for 10 minutes to see whether there's anything I've missed which I ought not to have done and see whether there are any
Yes,
further relevant
of course.
questions?
Well, Mr. Costa, when Council gets to the end of his questions, we always have a short break to enable him to check that he's not left anything out and to enable others who are following the proceedings but not from the room can suggest further questions that perhaps we ought to ask you. So we'll get a stop now. We'll come back at 12:25 and then we'll find out whether there are any additional questions.
Thank
All
you.
right? And again, while you're out of the room, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence.
Will do. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Would you like to go to the usher, please? Right, 12:25 then, please.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah. Yes, would you ask Mr. Costa to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Costa, well, let's see if there are any more questions for you. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Ms Costa, there are no further questions, so that simply leaves me to say thank you very much for attending today. It's much appreciated.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Costa, I should thank you on behalf of all three members of the panel for coming to give your evidence. I'm sure it's been inconvenient for you to do that, and I'm sorry about that, but it's important that we hear from people who were directly involved in various aspects of the matter, and so it's very helpful to hear what you have to tell us. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And I'm glad to say you're now free to go.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would you like to go with the usher then, please?
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Kinnear. Now, what is the next
The next
item on
witness
the
will,
agenda?
the next witness, sir, will be Mr. Colin Todd.
Yes.
Before Mr. Millett calls him, there's one final thing which I need to do, and that's formally
Yes.
to read into the record further witness statements which are relevant to Module 3.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'll do that by referring to a single document, which is a schedule that sets out witness statements, company and organisation details, and the relevant URN, so that those who can can examine precisely what those witnesses are saying and set out in their statements. The reference to that schedule is IDX 0767. The schedule consists of 10 pages, and so by formally reading that schedule into the record, that is the way of reading all of the witness statements set out there formally into the record, and that schedule will be available on the inquiry's website in
Thank
due
you.
course.
Yes.
So that brings to an end the factual evidence for Module 3. There, however, remains expert evidence from Mr. Todd, Ms. Menzies, and Dr. Lane.
Yes, thank you. Now, do you know, is Mr. Todd available to start giving his evidence before we break for lunch, or?
He is, as I understand it. And so I'd invite you to rise for the usual housekeeping arrangements to be made.
Yes, we'll need a short break anyway, shan't we? And I suggest that you ask the usher to come and get us when you're ready.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, good afternoon. I now call Mr. Colin Todd, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, please. Good afternoon, Mr. Todd.
Good afternoon, Chairman.
I understand
Sir,
you're going to make the affirmation, is that right?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
And it's on the screen in front of you, please.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Do sit down.
Thank you, sir.
Make yourself comfortable. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Todd, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Can I begin by thanking you very much for your coming to the inquiry and assisting us with your opinions. My questions about your opinions are intended to be short and simple. Sometimes they may not turn out that way. If you want me to repeat the question or put it in a different way, I'm very happy to do that. Can I also ask you, please, to keep your voice up so that the person who sits to your immediate right can get down everything you say? A simple yes or no is as good as that. Shaking your head or nodding your head doesn't work because it doesn't go onto the transcript.
Thank you, sir.
Now, and if you need a break at any time, other than the scheduled breaks we'll take, please let us know.
Thank you, sir.
Now, you've provided 2 reports to the inquiry for this phase 2, haven't you?
And a supplementary, for phase 2, yes. Sir.
Yes. The first one, let's look at that. It's at CTA 6011, and that's entitled Report for the Grenfell Tower Inquiry, Grenfell Tower, the Fire Risk Assessments of Carl Stokes. And you can see at the bottom of page 1 there that it's dated August 2020. First, can you confirm formally that that is your report?
Yes, it is, sir.
And I'm going to refer that to your main report. The signature's on page 2, but we don't need to look at it. The second report that you've helpfully provided us with is a supplemental report at CTA 6038, please. Can you confirm for us that that is your supplementary report?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
I'll call it that. And again, can you confirm that it's yours?
Yes, sir.
And there's a signature on page 2 if we need to look at it. Are the factual matters that you've set out in your reports true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are, sir.
Can you confirm that the report set out your true and complete professional opinion on the matters that you've addressed within them?
I can, sir, yes.
Can you confirm that you've understood your duty to the inquiry as an expert and that you've complied with that duty?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes to both questions?
Yes, yes.
Have you given evidence and the opinions set out in these reports in the same way that you would do to a court?
Yes, I have, sir.
And you've abided by the same principles, yes?
Yes, sir, the CPR.
Yes. Now, it's also right, isn't it, that you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry for phase 2. That's at CTA 6012, if we just have that up, please. And that is dated the 11th of May 2021, as we can see at the bottom of that first page there. If we go to page 20, can we look at that, please? We can see that above the date of the 11th of May 2021 is your signature. Have you read this witness statement recently?
I have, sir, last night.
You have last night. Just confirm formally for me, would you, if you would, that that is your signature?
Yes, sir, it is.
Yes. And can you confirm that the contents of that witness statement are true?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Now, your reports and this witness statement stand as your evidence to the inquiry. I'm going to focus on those matters which, in respect of your reports, are truly ones of expert opinion and where there have been material developments in the evidence given to the inquiry provided so far. Do you understand what I'm going to try to do?
Yes, sir, I do.
Very good. Now, the inquiry understands that you've been involved in developing standards relevant to fire risk assessments after the Grenfell Tower fire. But, unless I ask you otherwise, my questions are going to be focused on the standards and the practice of the reasonably competent fire risk assessor as they existed before the fire at Grenfell Tower on the 14th of June 2017. Do you understand that?
Yes, that's clear, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I begin substantively then, please, with your qualifications and your experience? Can we go, please, to CTA 6011, page 149, your main report, Annex E. This is where you set out your qualifications. And you can see on the page there you set out your academic qualifications, your professional body qualifications, and your expert witness experience.
Yes.
Now, at the top of page 149, you can see that you completed a Master's in Fire Safety Engineering in 1975, yes?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And you are a chartered engineer, a chartered building engineer, and a fellow of the Institution of Fire Engineers, the IFE.
Correct.
Correct. When did you become a chartered engineer?
1982, sir.
And when did you become a fellow of the IFE?
Oh, gosh. That would be some considerable time after 1992. I want to say probably, I'd be guessing, sir, perhaps 10, 15 years ago.
Right. And you said in the last answer, after 1992. Did you mean 1982?
Yeah, sorry, did I? Yeah, after 1982. I became a chartered engineer in 82 through the then Institution of Electrical Engineers, which is now the IET. And I'm dual registered as a chartered engineer. So I'm registered as a chartered engineer by the IET, which is what the Institution of Electrical Engineers became, but I'm also registered by the Institution of Fire Engineers.
Yes. And if we go to page 153 in this document, please, we can see that you describe your consultancy practice there. And you say in the third paragraph, in the third line, CS Todd Associates, this specialist practice provides consultancy services in all aspects of fire prevention, fire protection, and fire safety engineering. That's correct still today, is it?
Yes, sir, that's right.
And if we go to page 6 in the same document, much earlier on, page 6, we see under paragraph 1.13 there, the first bullet point, you say, I've carried out FRAs and have been responsible for quality assurance of FRAs carried out by others in my consulting practice since FRAs first became a legal requirement in December 1997.
Yes.
And that you can confirm that today, can you?
Yes, sir, I can.
Yes. And then if you continue down to the next bullet point down, you say that you're the technical author of all versions of the BSI publication PAS 79, or Publicly Available Specification 79. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And that provides guidance on fire risk assessments, doesn't it?
That's correct, sir.
And just to be clear for us, can you just confirm that the dates of publications of each of those editions for which you were responsible were 2005, 2007, and 2012?
Yes, the first version was in 2005, and that was under previous legislation. Then 2007 was to reflect the fire safety order, and then 2012 was simply a revision to bring it absolutely up to date.
Yes, and that was August 2012.
I can't tell you the month, sir, but
We will
I'll
come back
accept
to that because it may be important later. Is it right that you were also involved in some of the drafting and the development of the competency criteria for fire risk assessors, first published by the Fire Risk Assessment Competency Council, or FRAC, as I think it's known, on the 21st of December 2011?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
To what extent were you involved in that?
So on that, the Fire Risk Assessment Competency Council was a group of round about 30 stakeholders in the fire sector who came together because of concerns within the sector about the competence of fire risk assessors. And I think I was either co-opted or I think I represented the Fire Industry Association. I think it was the latter. And in that role, I drafted quite a lot of the standard or the competency criteria on behalf of the group for their consideration.
Right. Can you tell us very briefly which parts?
Certainly the introduction and the sort of introductory parts to it, and then the competency standard is a series of appendices, really. That's the bulk of the standard. And what it does is it breaks down fire safety into a number of subject areas. with a separate appendix for each subject area. And I prepared the first draft of quite a number of the subject areas, probably 4 or 5 of the subject areas.
Now, if we go to we'll stay on page 6 and look at the third bullet point. You say there that since 2003, you've been chairman of the IFE panel that registers both assessors and auditors. Are you still the chairman?
I stepped down just recently because I'd been there a long time and I have a high workload. So I swapped with the then current vice chairman. So he's now become chairman and I'm now vice chairman.
I see. And in the fourth bullet point, you say, and I summarise, that since 2008, you have chaired the Fire Risk Assessment Council of the Fire Industry Association, the FRA, which you've referred to just a moment ago, and you'll remain chairman until October this year. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that's
yes.
still the case, is it?
Yes, it is.
In the seventh bullet point, second from the bottom of the page, if we just scroll down a little, please, you say, I've delivered in-house training. You say, I've delivered in-house training courses on fire risk assessment for many fire and rescue services. These courses have been attended by delegates from around 50% of fire and rescue services in the UK. Is it right that Mr. Stokes undertook some of those courses?
He undertook a fire risk assessment course. I think he also went on a course that we delivered on fire safety in purpose-built blocks of flats and the LGA guide, which no doubt you will return to at some stage,
yeah.
sir. But in terms of fire risk assessment, we delivered an in-house course to Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service on behalf of the Northern Ireland Fire Safety Panel. And according to our records and Mr. Stokes' evidence, he was a delegate on that course, although I don't specifically remember him.
Right, thank you. Well, we'll come to the LGA guidance in just a moment. Before I do, is there anything in addition to paragraph 113 that you see on the page there, or anything in Annex E that you'd like to add by way of reference to your qualifications and experience?
I don't think so, sir, no.
Very good. Now, can I ask you then about the LGA guide? Can we please go to paragraph 42 of your supplemental witness statement, which is CTA 6012, page 9, paragraph 42. And you say here, even taking the appendices into account, the final text for which I was originally responsible amounts to less than 25% of the entire document. I'm aware that certain lawyers for CPs, as well as social media and certain specialist publications, have characterised me as the author of the LGA guide. In view of the circumstances outlined above, I wish to record for the inquiry my dissatisfaction with this characterisation, which at best is an approximation born of abbreviation, or at worst is a misrepresentation of the truth. Can we go to INQ 30148119, please? This is your LinkedIn profile, as we understand it. Can you confirm that?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Yes, if we go to page 4, you say on page 4, in the middle of the page, under accomplishments, 3 projects, and the second one down is draft guidance on fire safety in purpose-built blocks of flats, June 2011.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Yes, CS Todd and Associates were appointed to draft new national guidance for England and Wales on fire safety in purpose-built blocks of flats. I was ultimately responsible for the delivery of this guidance, and I was one of a team of 3 within the practice who drafted the guidance.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Did you write those words in this profile?
I probably did, or if I didn't, I would have authorised them.
Right. So you're content here today to adopt them as yours, are you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, can we go to page, back to your supplemental, back to your witness statement at page 12, CTA 6012, and look at the bottom of page 9, and look at paragraph 43 there. You say, notwithstanding the above, it is proper for me to note that there was a very close collaboration between Stephen, Malcolm and myself. We each checked each other's drafts, suggesting amendments as appropriate. See that?
Yes, sir.
And then Steve carried out some editing of the drafts prepared by Malcolm and myself, but I would also record that ultimately I carried out final edits to consider all technical issues and ensure consistency of language, so precluding any obvious joins between sections drafted by different consultants.
Yes, sir.
Moreover, as Managing Director of the practice and the principal point of liaison for the Project Board and Reference Board, to which I refer later, I had overall editorial control of the CSTA work delivered to LGID. That was discussed later in this statement, not total control of the technical content of the final publication.
Yes, sir.
Do you stand by that statement today?
Yes, sir, and I think that reflects what the LinkedIn profile was saying.
Yes, and in light of the LinkedIn profile and your statement that I just read to you at paragraph 43 of your witness statement, can you just explain why it is a misrepresentation to describe you as an author, if not the principal author, of the LGA Guide?
Yes, sir, certainly. The guide was drafted by a team of 3, Stephen Dawes, Malcolm Hoare and myself. Because of workload, Steve Dawes took the lead in organising the drafting, and I told him just to treat me as an author and use me as he thought fit to draft those parts of the guide that he wished me to draft. So to begin with, I was an author, if you like, of, as I said, about 25% of the document, and that would include the appendices as opposed to the main sections. I think I quoted, sir, a different figure for the percentage of the main text that I drafted. But then ultimately, I did an editorial job, and ultimately, as the managing director of the practice, I'm responsible for everything that goes out, sir. And so I did a final check through. There was an independent peer review by another member of the practice who wasn't involved. That's just part of our quality assurance process. But ultimately, I would take responsibility for what went out. It doesn't mean I should properly be characterised as the author. And in addition to that, we were only acting on behalf of a group to whom we were responsible. So although we drafted it, the final responsibility for the content rested with LGID after a very major consultation exercise.
Is there any part of the LGA Guide that from which you would distance yourself?
No, there's not, sir.
There isn't. Now, can we turn to a new topic? Mr. Chairman, it's 5 to 1. This new topic I will certainly not finish by 1 o'clock.
No.
Well, no. It's
Would it make better sense to stop?
It would.
Right. Well, Mr. Todd, we've only just got you started.
I'm happy to make a start on the topic. I'm happy to make a start on the topic.
We won't
but I fear
encourage
we will...
Mr. Millett, otherwise we shall be sitting here for a long time. And so I think actually, since we would break for lunch normally at 1 o'clock, I think we'll take advantage of the transition from topic to topic and break at that point. And we'll come back at 2 o'clock when we'll get a clean start and no doubt make more progress.
Very good, sir.
Right?
Thank you. Yes.
And I have to ask you, as I shall, I'll remind you on other occasions, when you leave the room now, having made the affirmation, it's important that you don't talk to anyone about your evidence.
Of course, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, well, you go with the usher. We'll see you again at 2 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.